Elderly widow shelters 20 freezing bikers. Next morning, 1,000 Hell's Angels stop outside her door. The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Montana plains, carrying with it the kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals and made exposed skin burn within seconds. It was the first week of December, and winter had descended on the small town of Bridgewater with a vengeance that locals hadn't seen in over 20 years. The temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees below zero, and the wind chill made it feel closer to 40 below. Eleanor Hartwell stood at the window of her modest farmhouse, watching the snow swirl in the gathering darkness. At 72 years old, she had lived through plenty of harsh Montana winters, but something about this one felt different, more dangerous, more unforgiving. The Weather Service had issued severe storm warnings, advising everyone to stay indoors, but Eleanor knew that not everyone had that luxury. The farmhouse had been her home for 47 years, ever since she and her late husband Thomas had bought the property as newlyweds fresh out of college. Thomas had been a veterinarian, and they had planned to raise animals and children in equal measure on this land. Life had other plans. They were never blessed with children, though not for lack of trying or hoping, but they had built a good life together nonetheless. Thomas had run his practice from a converted barn on the property, treating everything from cattle to cats, and Eleanor had taught English at the local high school. Thomas had passed away 3 years ago after a brief but brutal battle with pancreatic cancer. Eleanor had nursed him through those final months with a devotion that their friends said was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. Since his death, she had lived alone in the farmhouse, refusing all suggestions from concerned friends and distant relatives that she should move somewhere smaller, somewhere closer to town, somewhere more practical for a woman her age. This house held too many memories, too much of Thomas, too much of the life they had built together. Every room told a story: the kitchen where they had danced on Sunday mornings while coffee brewed, the living room where they had read books aloud to each other on winter evenings, the porch where they had watched countless sunsets while planning dreams that would never come to pass. Eleanor couldn't leave those memories behind. This house was where she felt closest to the man she had loved for nearly 5 decades. The property sat on the outskirts of Bridgewater, right where the main highway curved before heading into the mountains. It was the last house before a 30-mile stretch of road that offered no shelter, no services, nothing but open plains and treacherous mountain passes. In good weather, it was a beautiful drive. In weather like this, it was deadly. Eleanor had spent the day preparing for the storm, bringing in extra firewood, checking that the generator was working properly, making sure she had enough supplies to last a week if the roads became impassable. She had also done something that Thomas had taught her years ago. She had placed a large lantern in the front window, a beacon to let anyone passing by know that this was a place of safety and shelter. "We're the last house before the mountains," Thomas used to say. "That makes us responsible for looking out for travelers who might get caught out there." A light in the window could save someone's life. They had sheltered stranded travelers before over the years. Families whose cars had broken down, truckers who had misjudged the weather, even a young couple whose motorcycle had hit ice and sent them sliding into a ditch. Eleanor and Thomas had always welcomed them in, fed them, given them warm places to sleep, and sent them on their way with full stomachs and grateful hearts. It was simply what you did. It was how they had been raised, how they lived, how they understood their responsibility to their fellow human beings. Now, standing alone at the window with the lantern burning bright, Eleanor said a quiet prayer that no one would be foolish enough to be out in this storm. But even as she prayed, she knew that hope and reality didn't always align. She was just turning away from the window to start preparing dinner when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. The rumble of engines, multiple engines, growing louder as they approached. Eleanor's heart quickened as she looked out to see headlights cutting through the swirling snow, at least 20 motorcycles pulling into her driveway and the area in front of her house. Motorcycles. In this weather, Eleanor felt a spike of fear, not of the bikers themselves, but for them. They had to be half frozen, in serious danger of hypothermia or worse. She could see them dismounting, their movements stiff and slow, the way people moved when cold had seeped deep into their muscles and bones. Without hesitation, Eleanor grabbed her heavy coat and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, but she pushed forward. "Come inside," she shouted over the wind. "All of you, get inside now before you freeze to death." The bikers were a frightening sight up close. Huge men in leather jackets and vests covered in patches, their faces hidden behind frost-covered beards and balaclavas, their hands clumsy and shaking as they tried to secure their motorcycles. But Eleanor had never been one to judge people by appearance, and right now, all she saw were human beings in desperate need of warmth and shelter. The first biker to reach her was a tall man, well over 6 feet, with ice literally frozen in his beard. His lips were blue, and he was shaking so hard he could barely speak. "Ma'am, we thought we could make it through. Storm came up faster than." "Explanations later," Eleanor said firmly, using the same no-nonsense tone that had kept high school students in line for 30 years. "Inside. Now. All of you." She herded them into her house like a mother hen gathering chicks, counting as they came through the door. 20 men, all of them showing various stages of cold exposure, all of them wearing the distinctive patches of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Under different circumstances, Eleanor might have felt a flutter of nervousness. The Hells Angels had a fearsome reputation after all, but circumstances weren't different. These were human beings who needed help, and she had a warm house and the means to provide it. Her living room, which usually felt spacious for one elderly woman, suddenly seemed very small with 20 large bikers crowding into it, bringing with them the smell of leather, motor oil, and the sharp scent of extreme cold. "Coats off," Eleanor commanded. "I need to see if anyone has frostbite. You," she pointed at the tall man who had spoken first. "What's your name?" "Axe," he managed through chattering teeth. I'm the road captain. This is my fault. I thought we could beat the storm." "Well, you didn't, so now we deal with what is," Eleanor said practically. "Axe, I need you to help me assess your men. Anyone who can't feel their fingers or toes, anyone with white patches on their skin, anyone who's confused or slurring their words. Those are the priorities." Eleanor had learned about cold weather injuries from Thomas, who had treated his share of ranchers and farmers over the years. She moved through the group with efficient competence, checking hands and faces, asking questions, making quick assessments. Most of them were just very cold and would be fine once warmed up properly. But 3 men showed signs of frostbite on their fingers, and one younger biker seemed dangerously close to hypothermia, barely responsive and unable to stop shaking. You, and you," Eleanor pointed to the 3 with frostbite. "Kitchen. I need to get your hands in lukewarm water. Not hot, lukewarm. This is going to hurt, but we need to do it. The rest of you start stripping off wet clothes. I'll get blankets." She turned to a biker who seemed more alert than the others. "What's your name?" "Torch, ma'am." "Torch, that young man there. What's his name?" "That's Cricket. He's only 19. His first long ride. Cricket is hypothermic. I need you to help me get him warm. We need to raise his core temperature slowly. Do you understand?" Torch nodded, his expression serious. Despite his intimidating appearance, tattoos covering his neck, scars on his face, a general air of having seen and done hard things, his eyes showed intelligence and genuine concern for his brother. For the next 2 hours, Eleanor's house became a triage center. She worked with practiced efficiency, moving between the kitchen where the frostbite victims sat with their hands in carefully temperature-controlled water, crying out as feeling returned painfully to frozen fingers, and the living room where Cricket was being warmed with blankets and body heat from his brothers. Eleanor made gallons of lukewarm tea, not hot, which could shock cold-damaged systems, and distributed it to everyone. She raided her pantry and freezer, pulling out everything she had to make food for 20 unexpected guests. She worked the way she had always worked in a crisis. Calmly, competently, without fuss or complaint. The bikers watched her in something like awe. This elderly woman, barely 5 feet tall and probably 100 pounds soaking wet, had taken command of the situation like a general marshalling troops. She gave orders that these hardened men followed without question, not because she was intimidating, but because she so clearly knew what she was doing and cared about their welfare. As the men began to thaw and recover, details of their situation emerged. They had been on their way back from a charity toy run in Billings, riding in a convoy to deliver Christmas presents to a children's hospital. The weather had been cold but manageable when they left, but the storm had blown in faster and more severely than predicted. By the time they realized how dangerous the conditions had become, they were committed to the mountain road with nowhere to shelter, except for the house with the light in the window. "We saw your lantern," Axe explained once he could speak without his teeth chattering. "We were in real trouble, ma'am. Another 10 miles and we'd have had guys going down. The cold was that bad. That light saved our lives." Eleanor waved off the gratitude. "My husband always said we had a responsibility to travelers on this road. I'm just glad you saw it and had the sense to stop." By midnight, everyone was stable. The 3 with frostbite would need to see a doctor, but Eleanor's quick intervention had likely saved their fingers from serious damage. Cricket had recovered from his hypothermia, though he would need monitoring through the night. The rest of the men were cold, tired, and chastened by their close call, but fundamentally okay. The problem now was space. Eleanor's house had 3 bedrooms, her own, a guest room, and Thomas's old study that still had a daybed in it. Even using the couches and every spare blanket she owned, there wasn't enough space for 20 large men to sleep comfortably. "We can't ask you to," Axe began, but Eleanor cut him off. "You're not asking, I'm telling. You'll make do with what I have. Some of you will sleep on the floor, some on couches, some wherever you can find a spot. I'll keep the fire going and the heat up. It's not luxury, but it's warm and dry, and that's what matters." She disappeared into her bedroom and emerged with armfuls of blankets, quilts, and pillows. "These were wedding gifts, Christmas presents, things I've collected over 50 years of marriage. They're meant to keep people warm, so that's what they'll do." As she distributed bedding, one of the younger bikers spoke up hesitantly. "Ma'am, why are you doing this? I mean, we're grateful, but you don't know us. We're Hell's Angels. Most people cross the street when they see us coming. But you just opened your door like it was nothing." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Young man, I taught high school for 30 years. I learned early on that you can't judge a person by how they look or what they wear or what label they carry. You judge them by what they do. You were in trouble, I had the means to help, so I helped. That's all there is to it." Another biker, older with graying hair and a weathered face, spoke up. "Your husband was a lucky man, ma'am, to have a woman like you." Eleanor's eyes misted slightly. "I was the lucky one. Thomas was the best man I ever knew. He taught me that we're all responsible for each other, that we all deserve kindness and help when we need it. You're not the first people I've sheltered in this house, and you probably won't be the last." She showed them where the bathroom was, pointed out which lights to leave on for safety, and gave strict instructions that the 3 with frostbite were to wake her immediately if their pain got worse or if they noticed any change in sensation. Then she retired to her bedroom, though she left her door open so she could hear if anyone needed anything. Alone in the room she had shared with Thomas for so many years, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. 20 Hell's Angels were sleeping in her house. She could hear their quiet conversations, the rustling of blankets, occasional coughs and movements. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't since Thomas died, filled with human presence and the sound of people who had been saved from the cold. "Well, Thomas?" she whispered to the photograph on her nightstand. Her husband smiling in his veterinary coat, looking exactly as she wanted to remember him. "I think you'd approve of tonight. These boys needed help, and we had a warm house and food to share. Just like you always taught me." She slept lightly, listening for any sounds of distress, but the house remained quiet except for the rumble of snoring and the howl of the wind outside. The storm raged through the night, dumping 2 feet of snow and creating drifts that reached the windows. Eleanor rose at dawn, as was her habit, and made her way to the kitchen. She found Torch already awake, tending the fire and looking out the window at the snow. "Morning, ma'am," he said quietly. "Storm's still going. We're snowed in good." "Then I suppose you'll be staying for breakfast," Eleanor said practically. "I hope you all like pancakes, because I have enough mix to feed an army, and it looks like that's what I'm doing." She moved around the kitchen with efficient purpose, pulling out mixing bowls and griddles, starting coffee, setting out maple syrup and butter. The smell of cooking gradually woke the sleeping men, who emerged from blankets and makeshift beds looking sheepish and grateful. Breakfast was a crowded, chaotic affair with men taking turns at the table since Eleanor didn't have enough chairs for everyone. But it was also warm and friendly, filled with quiet thank yous and genuine appreciation. These hardened bikers, men who had lived rough lives and seen hard times, were gentle and respectful in Eleanor's home, treating her with a courtesy that would have surprised anyone who only knew them by reputation. As they ate, Axe made calls on his phone, updating the club's leadership on their situation. The storm was expected to continue through the day, and the roads wouldn't be cleared until the following morning at the earliest. They were stuck, and Eleanor was stuck with them. "Ma'am, we'll do whatever work you need done," Axe said. "We can shovel, chop wood, fix anything that needs fixing. We don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Eleanor assured him. "But I won't turn down help with the wood. The pile is getting low, and with this many people in the house, we're going through it faster than usual." The men practically fell over themselves volunteering. Despite the continued cold and wind, a crew went out to split and stack firewood. Others swept snow off the porch and walkways. Someone noticed that Eleanor's gutters were sagging under the weight of ice and fixed them. Another group organized the barn, discovering Thomas's old veterinary equipment and asking respectful questions about what he had done. Eleanor found herself telling stories about Thomas, about the time he had stayed up all night delivering a calf in a blizzard, about his gentleness with scared animals, about the way he had never charged full price to families he knew were struggling financially. The bikers listened with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at the funny stories, falling silent at the sad ones. "He sounds like he was a good man," Cricket said, the young one who had nearly succumbed to hypothermia. "Like a really good man." "He was," Eleanor agreed. "Best man I ever knew. I miss him every single day." "Is that why you helped us?" Cricket asked. "Because it's what he would have done?" Eleanor considered the question. "Partly, but also because it's who I am. Thomas didn't make me kind. I married him because we shared the same values. We both believed that we're responsible for taking care of each other, especially those who are struggling or in trouble. Doesn't matter who they are or what they look like or what choices they've made. When someone needs help, you help if you can." That evening, as the storm finally began to ease, the men gathered in Eleanor's living room. Someone had brought in a guitar from one of the saddlebags, and music filled the house. Country songs and rock ballads and old folk tunes that Eleanor remembered from her youth. She sat in Thomas's favorite chair, wrapped in one of the quilts, and felt something she hadn't felt since her husband died. She felt like she wasn't alone. These rough, tough men, some of them with prison records, some with pasts they weren't proud of, had brought life and warmth back into her house. They had been respectful, helpful, and genuinely kind. They had treated her home with care and treated her with a courtesy that bordered on reverence. Before bed, Axe approached her quietly. "Ma'am, I want you to know what you did for us, taking us in like that, no questions asked. That's not something we'll forget. The club takes care of people who take care of us. We'll make this right." "You don't owe me anything," Eleanor said. "I did what anyone should do." "But not everyone would," Axe replied. "That's the difference. You saw a bunch of scary-looking bikers and still opened your door. That takes a special kind of person." The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold, but the storm had passed. The roads were being cleared, and by noon, the bikers were preparing to leave. They insisted on shoveling her entire driveway and walkway, stacking enough firewood to last her through the winter, and checking every system in her house to make sure everything was working properly. As they prepared to mount their motorcycles, each man stopped to shake Eleanor's hand and thank her personally. Some hugged her gently, these huge men carefully embracing a tiny elderly woman who had saved their lives. Cricket was crying openly, and Eleanor patted his cheek and told him to ride safe. X was the last to leave. "Ma'am, you're going to see us again. I promise you that. The club doesn't forget kindness like yours. You take care of yourselves," Eleanor said. "And next time, check the weather report more carefully." X laughed. "Yes, ma'am. We definitely learned that lesson." She stood on her porch, wrapped in her coat, and watched as 20 motorcycles roared to life and pulled out of her driveway in formation. They honked and waved, and then they were gone, disappearing down the snow-covered highway toward Bridgewater and beyond. Eleanor went back into her house, which suddenly felt very empty and quiet again. She looked around at the evidence of her guests, the blankets and pillows still scattered around, the dishes in the sink from breakfast, the lingering smell of coffee and leather, and she smiled. "We did good, Thomas," she whispered. "We saved some lives." She cleaned up the house, put things back in order, and resumed her normal routine. Days passed, then a week, and Eleanor thought about the bikers occasionally, hoping they had all recovered fully from their ordeal, hoping Cricket's frostbitten fingers were healing properly, hoping they were all riding safe. She certainly didn't expect to see them again. She had helped them because it was the right thing to do, not because she expected anything in return. That wasn't how kindness worked in her mind. You did good because it was good, not because you wanted recognition or reward. So when, exactly 1 week after the bikers had left, Eleanor woke to the sound of multiple motorcycles approaching her house, she was confused. She looked out the window and her breath caught in her throat. There weren't 20 motorcycles this time. There were hundreds, maybe even 1,000. They filled her driveway, lined the highway in both directions, covered every available space around her property. The rumble of their engines was like thunder, and as she watched in shock, they all cut their engines simultaneously, leaving sudden, stunning silence. Eleanor grabbed her coat and stepped out onto her porch, her heart pounding. Had something gone wrong? Was someone hurt? Why were they all here? From the midst of the crowd, Axe emerged, along with several other men she didn't recognize but who carried themselves with obvious authority. They approached her porch and Axe smiled broadly. "Good morning, Mrs. Hartwell," he said formally. "I told you we'd be back. I hope you don't mind the crowd. We brought some friends." I don't understand," Eleanor stammered, which was unusual for her. She prided herself on being unflappable, but this was beyond anything she had expected. An older man stepped forward, perhaps in his late 60s, with silver hair and a president's patch on his vest. "Mrs. Hartwell, my name is Steele. I'm the national president of the Hells Angels. When my road captain told me what you did, how you took in 20 of our brothers during that storm, how you saved lives without hesitation, I knew we had to come and pay our respects properly. But there are so many of you," Eleanor said weakly. "Word spread," Steele explained. "When we put out the call about what happened, brothers from all over the Northwest wanted to come. Some rode from California, some from Washington, some from Idaho. We have members here from at least 15 different chapters. They all wanted to meet the woman who exemplifies what we believe in: loyalty, protection, taking care of people who need help." Another man stepped forward, younger, carrying a large envelope. "Mrs. Hartwell, the club took up a collection. We wanted to make sure you weren't out of pocket for taking care of our brothers. We wanted to make sure your kindness didn't cost you anything." He handed her the envelope. Eleanor opened it with shaking hands and gasped. There was a check inside for $50,000. "This is too much," she said immediately. "I didn't help you for money. I helped because it was the right thing to do." "We know that," Axe said gently. "That's exactly why you deserve it. Ma'am, you saved our lives. Cricket could have died from hypothermia. 3 guys could have lost fingers to frostbite. All of us were in real danger, and you took us in without hesitation. Please let us honor that. Let us make sure you're taken care of the way you took care of us." A woman pushed through the crowd, probably in her 50s, with long gray hair and warm eyes. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Maggie. I'm married to Steele. When I heard what you did, how you handled everything so calmly and competently, I had to come meet you myself. Women like you are rare. You're a hero even if you don't see yourself that way." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I'm just an old widow who did what my husband taught me to do. I'm nothing special." "That's where you're wrong," Steele said firmly. "You're exactly what's special about this world. Someone who sees people in need and helps without judgment, without asking what's in it for them, without letting fear or prejudice get in the way. That's real character, ma'am. That's real strength. And that deserves to be recognized and honored. He gestured to the crowd behind him. These men and women came from hundreds of miles away just to meet you, just to say thank you, just to make sure you know that your kindness matters and is appreciated. We've got something else for you too. A truck pulled up, and Eleanor watched in astonishment as bikers began unloading what looked like months' worth of supplies. Groceries, household goods, firewood that had been professionally cut and split, heating oil, everything she might need to make it through the winter comfortably. We noticed your generator was old, Axe said. So we brought you a new one, top of the line, with enough fuel to run for weeks if you need it. And we fixed that leak in your barn roof. Hope you don't mind, but we came by yesterday while you were in town and took care of it. And this, Maggie added, handing Eleanor a thick folder, is information about a fund we've established in your husband's name, the Thomas Hartwell Memorial Fund. It will provide free veterinary care to families in this county who can't afford it. We talked to some of his old clients and colleagues, and they all said he never turned anyone away because of money. So now his legacy will continue. We've started it with $100,000, and we'll keep adding to it. Eleanor couldn't speak. She stood on her porch, this elderly woman who had simply done what she thought was right, and watched as 1,000 motorcycle club members transformed her property into a scene of organized generosity. They didn't just bring supplies, they brought expertise. Someone noticed her fence was falling down and fixed it. Someone else serviced her tractor. A group of women cleaned her gutters and windows, refusing to let her help, insisting she had done enough and it was their turn to serve her. The local sheriff showed up, drawn by reports of a massive biker gathering, and stopped in his tracks when he saw what was happening. One of the deputies, a young man named Miller, approached Eleanor on the porch. "Mrs. Hartwell, is everything okay here? Do you need assistance?" Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure joy mixed with disbelief. "Deputy Miller, everything is more than okay. These people are thanking me for helping some of them during the storm last week. I think they might be overdoing it a bit, but they're very kind." Steele approached the deputy with a friendly smile. "Officer, we're just paying our respects to a woman who saved the lives of 20 of our brothers. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. Just gratitude in action. We'll be cleared out by evening, and we'll leave this property better than we found it." The sheriff, an older man who had been in law enforcement for 30 years, looked around at the scene. Bikers working industriously, supplies being organized, Eleanor standing on her porch with tears streaming down her face and a smile on her lips, and nodded. "Carry on, then. Mrs. Hartwell, if you need anything, you call us." "I think I'm well taken care of, Sheriff, but thank you," Eleanor replied. News crews arrived by mid-afternoon, drawn by the extraordinary sight. They interviewed Eleanor, who told the story of the storm and the stranded bikers with humble simplicity. They interviewed Steele and Axe, who spoke about the club's code of honor and their commitment to protecting and supporting people who showed them kindness. "The world sees us as outlaws and troublemakers," Steele said to the cameras. "And yeah, we live outside some of society's rules. But we have our own code, our own values. Loyalty, brotherhood, protecting those who can't protect themselves, and honoring people who show us genuine kindness. Mrs. Hartwell exemplifies everything we believe in. She saw people in need and helped without hesitation. That's real courage. That's real character. And that deserves to be celebrated." The story went viral within hours. Widow saves 20 freezing bikers. 1,000 Hells Angels show up to thank her. Read headlines across the country. Social media exploded with comments praising Eleanor's compassion and the bikers' gratitude. It became a feel-good story that cut through all the negativity and division that usually dominated the news. People were inspired by it. They shared it with messages like, "This is what humanity should look like," and "Faith in people restored." Teachers used it as a classroom discussion about not judging people by stereotypes. Pastors referenced it in sermons about genuine charity and kindness. And Eleanor, uncomfortable with the attention but gracious in the face of it, simply said, "I did what anyone should do. I had a warm house and people needed shelter. It's really that simple." But it wasn't simple, not really. because the truth was that most people wouldn't have opened their door to 20 intimidating-looking bikers in the middle of the night during a blizzard. Most people would have been too afraid, too suspicious, too unwilling to take the risk. Eleanor's willingness to help without judgment, to see human beings in need rather than stereotypes to fear, was precisely what made her actions extraordinary. The bikers stayed until evening, as promised, and when they finally prepared to leave, they did so in a way that was both moving and impressive. They lined up in formation, creating a corridor from Eleanor's porch to the highway. Steel and axe escorted her down this corridor, and as she passed, each biker placed a hand over their heart in a gesture of respect and gratitude. At the highway, Steel presented her with one final gift, a custom leather vest, sized for her small frame, with patches that identified her as an honorary member of the club. On the back was a special patch that read Guardian Angel, with an embroidered image of a lantern in a window. "Your family now," Steele said simply. "That vest means something in our world. It means you're under our protection. It means if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call us and we'll come running. It means you're one of ours, and we take care of our own." Eleanor hugged him, this elderly woman embracing a hardened biker, and whispered, "Thank you. Thomas would have loved this." "I think we would have loved Thomas too," Steele replied. "Any man who taught his wife to see people instead of labels, to give help instead of judgment. That's someone we would have been proud to call brother." They mounted their motorcycles, and with a roar that shook the windows of Eleanor's farmhouse, 1,000 Hells Angels rode away into the Montana evening. Neighbors who had come out to watch the spectacle applauded, and Eleanor waved until the last motorcycle disappeared from view. She went back into her house, her warm, well-stocked, newly repaired house, and sat in Thomas's chair. She looked at the check on the table, at the folder about the memorial fund in his name, at the leather vest draped over the back of the couch. And she cried, not from sadness but from overwhelming gratitude and joy. "We did it, Thomas," she said to his photograph. "We lit a lantern in the window and saved some lives, and look what came of it. Look at all this good that came from one simple act of kindness. You were right, we are responsible for each other. And when we live that truth, amazing things happen." The story of Eleanor and the Hells Angels continued to resonate long after that day. The Thomas Hartwell Memorial Fund grew, supported by donations from across the country, and over the next year it provided free veterinary care to over 100 families. Eleanor became a spokesperson for the fund, sharing stories about her husband's compassion and dedication. The bikers returned regularly, not in groups of 1,000 but in smaller numbers, stopping by to check on Eleanor, to bring her supplies, to help with maintenance around the property, to simply sit on her porch and talk about life. She became, in a real sense, the grandmother of the regional chapters, someone they checked on and protected and turned to for advice. Cricket, the young biker who had nearly died from hypothermia, became especially close to Eleanor. He visited once a month, helping with chores and listening to her stories about Thomas. She encouraged him to pursue his education, and with the club's support, he enrolled in community college to study emergency medical services. He credited Eleanor with inspiring him to want to help people the way she had helped him. Eleanor lived for another 12 years after that winter storm, active and engaged until the very end. She passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, still in the farmhouse she had shared with Thomas, still surrounded by the memories of a life well lived. Her funeral was attended by over 3,000 people. The Hells Angels came from across the entire country, creating a motorcycle procession that stretched for miles. They honored her with full club honors, something rarely given to someone outside the organization. The service celebrated not just her long life, but the values she had embodied: kindness, courage, compassion, and the fundamental belief that we are all responsible for taking care of each other. Steele, now in his late 70s but still riding, gave the eulogy. Eleanor Hartwell was 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed maybe 100 pounds, he said. But she was a giant. She reminded us what real strength looks like. Not muscles or weapons or intimidation, but the courage to help someone when they need it, the wisdom to see people instead of labels, the compassion to give without expecting anything in return. She saved 20 lives during a blizzard, and in doing so, she touched thousands more. She showed us the best of what humanity can be. The Thomas Hartwell Memorial Fund was renamed the Eleanor and Thomas Hartwell Foundation, and it expanded beyond veterinary care to provide emergency assistance to families in crisis. Help with heating bills, medical expenses, car repairs, whatever people needed to get through hard times. It was funded primarily by the Hells Angels charitable efforts, and over the years it helped thousands of families. Eleanor's farmhouse was preserved as a community center, a place where people could gather, where kids could do homework after school, where families could get help with bills or food, where anyone in need could find shelter and support. The lantern still burned in the front window every night, a beacon that remained true to Thomas and Eleanor's belief that they had a responsibility to watch out for travelers who might need help. On the wall of the community center hung a large photograph of Eleanor in her honorary vest, surrounded by bikers, smiling that gentle smile that had characterized her entire life. Below it was a plaque with a quote from her interview after the bikers had returned to thank her. "I didn't help them because I expected anything in return. I helped them because it was the right thing to do. That's all there is to it." And that simple truth became the foundation's guiding principle. Do the right thing. Help when you can. See people, not stereotypes. Take care of each other. Be responsible for your community. Light a lantern in the window so that those who are lost or struggling know there's a safe place to go. Eleanor's story inspired countless acts of kindness. People who heard it were moved to help their own neighbors, to look past appearances and prejudices, to open their doors to those in need. Teachers told it to students as an example of real courage. Parents told it to children as a lesson in compassion. Pastors and community leaders referenced it as a model of what caring for each other should look like. The bikers themselves were changed by knowing Eleanor. Her example reinforced their commitment to their community service work, and chapters across the country increased their charitable activities. Toy drives, food banks, fundraisers for families in crisis. They wore their guardian angel patches with pride, honoring the elderly widow who had shown them that true strength lay in compassion, not intimidation. Years later, Cricket, now a paramedic and volunteer coordinator for the foundation, would bring his own children to visit Eleanor's farmhouse-turned-community center. He would point to her photograph and tell them the story. "That woman saved my life twice," he would say. "Once when I was freezing to death in a blizzard, and once when she showed me that my life could mean something, that I could use my experiences to help others. She was barely 5 feet tall, but she was the strongest person I ever met." His children would ask, as children always do, "But why did she help you? Weren't you strangers? Wasn't she scared?" And Cricket would smile and repeat what Eleanor had told him that night by her fireplace. She said that we're all responsible for each other. That when you see someone in need and you have the means to help, you help. No questions, no judgment, no fear. Just help. Because that's what being human means. The legacy of that winter storm, of 20 freezing bikers and one elderly widow with a lantern in her window, continued to spread like ripples on water, touching lives in ways that could never be fully measured. It became more than just a story. It became a reminder of who we could be at our best, of what community really meant, of the power that resided in simple acts of kindness done without expectation of reward. On the anniversary of that storm every year, hundreds of bikers would ride to Bridgewater and gather at Eleanor's farmhouse. They would share a meal in the community center, contribute to the foundation, and take a moment of silence to honor the woman who had taught them that the most courageous thing you could do was open your door to someone in need. And every night, as darkness fell, someone would light the lantern in the window, Eleanor's lantern, the one she had placed there so many years ago when Thomas first taught her about responsibility to travelers. It burned bright, a beacon in the darkness, a promise that this was still a place of safety and shelter, a reminder that somewhere in the world, kindness still mattered and compassion still had power. Local children grew up knowing the story, and it shaped how they saw the world. They learned not to judge people by how they looked or what they wore or what labels they carried. They learned that scary-looking bikers could have the biggest hearts. They learned that small acts of kindness could create enormous change. They learned that one person truly could make a difference. The story was eventually turned into a book, with all proceeds going to the foundation. It was made into a documentary that aired on national television. Schools across the country added it to their curriculum as an example of ethical behavior and community responsibility. But more than any of that, it lived in the hearts of everyone who heard it and chose to act on its message. Because that was Eleanor's real gift to the world. Not just that she had saved 20 lives on a winter night, but that she had reminded thousands of people that they had the power to do the same. That every single day presented opportunities to help, to care, to see people in need and respond with compassion rather than fear. The bikers who had been sheltered that night carried the story with them wherever they went. They told it to prospects joining the club, using it as an example of the kind of people they should aspire to be and the kind of people they should honor and protect. They told it to their children and grandchildren, wanting them to understand that respect and kindness were earned through actions, not demanded through intimidation. Axe, who had been the road captain that night and had made the decision to stop at the house with the light in the window, eventually became a chapter president himself. He made community service a cornerstone of his leadership, always asking, what would Eleanor do? When faced with decisions about how the club should engage with their community. She didn't see a bunch of scary bikers, he would tell his chapter. She saw human beings who needed help. She didn't worry about our patches or our reputation or whether we were dangerous. She worried about whether we were going to freeze to death. That's the kind of clarity we should all have. See the need, meet the need, don't overthink it. Torch, who had helped Eleanor care for cricket that night, went on to become an EMT instructor, teaching first responders across the state. He always included Eleanor's story in his classes as an example of quick thinking and effective crisis management under pressure. She was 72 years old, alone in her house, and suddenly responsible for 20 men with various stages of cold injury. He would tell his students. She assessed, prioritized, delegated, and executed a treatment plan that saved lives. No panic, no hesitation, just competent action. That's what real heroism looks like. The 3 bikers who had suffered frostbite that night all recovered fully, thanks to Eleanor's quick intervention. They made it their mission to check on elderly people in their communities during harsh weather, making sure no one was without heat or supplies. They called it Eleanor's Watch and recruited others to help, creating a network of bikers who looked after vulnerable people during winter storms. Even people who had never met Eleanor felt connected to her story. Travelers passing through Bridgewater would stop at the community center to see the photograph and leave donations to the foundation. Bikers from clubs across the country, even clubs that had traditionally been rivals of the Hells Angels, would visit to pay their respects and contribute to the work being done in Eleanor's name. The story transcended boundaries of age, of class, of subculture, of geography. It became a shared cultural touchstone, a story that everyone seemed to know, that people referenced when they wanted to talk about real courage or genuine kindness or the importance of looking past appearances. Remember that widow in Montana? People would say, and everyone would know exactly what story they meant. It became shorthand for doing the right thing regardless of fear or prejudice, for seeing people as individuals rather than stereotypes, for understanding that we all have a responsibility to help each other. The mayor of Bridgewater, speaking at a town council meeting 5 years after Eleanor's death, summed it up perfectly. Eleanor Hartwell put our town on the map, but more importantly, she reminded the entire country what small-town values really mean. Not suspicion of outsiders, not fear of people who look different, but genuine hospitality and compassion. She saw people in trouble and helped them. It was that simple and that profound. We should all aspire to be more like her. The town erected a statue in the town square, not of Eleanor alone, but of her standing with her hand extended toward a kneeling biker, helping him up. The inscription read simply, "We are all responsible for each other." Eleanor Hartwell, 1951 to 2035. On cold winter nights, when storms rolled across the Montana plains and temperatures plummeted to dangerous levels, the lantern still burned in the window of what had been Eleanor's farmhouse. And sometimes, travelers in need still stopped there, finding warmth and shelter and help, just as 20 bikers had found it years before. The volunteers who staffed the community center had been trained in Eleanor's methods. Assess quickly, act decisively, care genuinely, expect nothing in return. They welcomed everyone who came through the door with the same non-judgmental compassion that Eleanor had shown. And every person who was helped was told the story, about the widow who had saved freezing bikers, about the lantern in the window, about the belief that we are all responsible for taking care of each other. And many of those people, inspired by Eleanor's example, went on to help others in their own communities, spreading the ripples ever wider. Cricket, now in his 50s with children of his own, still made the pilgrimage to Bridgewater every year on the anniversary of that storm. He would stand in front of Eleanor's photograph and remember the scared 19-year-old he had been, nearly dead from hypothermia, and the gentle elderly woman who had saved his life and then changed it completely. "Thank you," he would whisper every year. "Thank you for seeing past the patches and the leather. Thank you for seeing a kid who needed help. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. Thank you for teaching me that my life could matter." And though Eleanor was gone, her lesson remained. That kindness has power, that compassion can transform lives, that one person choosing to help can create changes that echo through generations. That we are, in fact, all responsible for each other. And when we live that truth, extraordinary things become possible. The storm that had brought 20 freezing bikers to Eleanor's door had been dangerous and frightening. But it had also been a gift, an opportunity for compassion to meet need, for courage to overcome fear, for humanity to triumph over prejudice. And from that one night of shelter and warmth, a legacy had been born that would outlast everyone involved and inspire people for generations to come. Eleanor Hartwell had been right all along. You light a lantern in the window. You open your door to people in need. You help because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, your small act of kindness becomes something much larger. A movement, a foundation, a legacy, a reminder to the world of who we can be when we choose compassion over fear. That was Eleanor's gift to the world. Not just that she saved 20 lives on a winter night, but that she showed thousands of others how to live with courage, compassion, and an unshakable commitment to taking care of each other. And on cold Montana nights, when the wind howled and the snow fell and temperatures dropped to dangerous levels, the lantern still burned in the window. A beacon, a promise, a reminder that somewhere in the darkness, there was warmth and safety and someone who cared enough to help, just as there had always been, just as there always would be. Because some lessons once learned are never forgotten, and some lights once lit never truly go out. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about courage, compassion, and the extraordinary power of ordinary kindness. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that good people still exist, and that one person really can make a difference. Because Eleanor's lesson matters now more than ever, we are all responsible for each other. And when we live that truth, we change the world. Thank you for watching, and remember, keep your lantern burning bright. You never know whose life you might save.